This evening, I share the highlights of finding 377 bird species in Missouri. I'm also sharing the development of birding as a lifestyle and a growing appreciation of the complexity of natural systems and a commitment to preserve critical habitats of Missouri. This program was first done to present to people with a limited knowledge of Missouri's birds and even less familiarity with me. Many of you are well versed in the birds of Missouri, and for better or worse, you know me and my warped sense of humor. So this program has been modified with that familiarity in mind. I'm an ardent birder, and I'm a lousy photographer. So to illustrate the birds tonight, I'm deeply indebted to Missouri photographers, bird photographers. I don't know how I missed Bill Palmer in this search for him, but I did. So, but he's got his own birds to show. I want to thank Diane Brickmont, Doug Hommert, Carol Western, Chris Barringer, Paul McKenzie, and most especially Al Smith. And that reason will come up later, you'll understand. In response to Ms. Lincoln's addition of the words, "how a birder was born" in the promo for this talk, I am compelled to declare that I was born in the usual way in 1944 in Bothwell Hospital, Sedalia. And the guy with me in this photo, on my right, became my stepbrother about 50 years later when each of us had a widowed parent. And he can verify every fact here of the origins. Whoop, that's the other way. There we go. This changes, because when I first put this together, it was 440 species, and since then, a bird showed up in Columbia that very few people got to see, and now it's 441. So there are about 441 species on the annotated checklist for birds of Missouri, and only about 431 findable and countable under the rules of the American Birding Association and the Missouri Bird Records Committee. And that committee reviews documentations of rare bird finds. Although 377 is the highest listed on eBird, not all birders, especially we old folks, are on eBird. Dave Easterwood has 400 birds in Missouri. Tim Barksdale has in the upper 390s, I think 399. And the last time I checked, Bill Reeves down in southeast Missouri had 375. And he may be more than that now. I've spent my life enjoying nature, working as a camp counselor, canoeing, a season as a national park ranger, learning wildflowers and trees and mammal prints and scat. I saw birds, but they were more background than subject. I kept a list of birds when we moved into the house on Bradshaw in 1982. But again, it was a sort of casual, oh, by the way kind of thing. It wasn't a compelling piece of art. That changed in the spring of 1993, when after surgery for a blocked femoral artery, my husband Jared and two friends took me on a walk to Rockbridge State Park. I learned later the friends were there to help Jerry carry me out if that was necessary. They weren't just there for company. And while we were out there on a slow stroll, a small flock of birds came by, and they were busily feeding. About 20 birds. They were olive green on their backs, white in the wings, some yellow on the front. And they didn't ever sit still. And that was about all we could tell. We didn't have binoculars. My companions were interested. I was fascinated. How could I spend my entire life outdoors and never seen these birds before, and not had the slightest idea what they were. We had a bird field guide at home, and I'd looked at it, but I'd never studied it. So I went home and I started going through it. And I began to decide I need to learn what's in here. I studied 2 birds a day, and at the end of the week I'd give myself a self-test. And if I couldn't answer my own questions, I threw that bird back in the pot and we went around the next week. A bird that sets a person into a lifestyle of finding birds is called a spark bird. I misidentified the birds in that little flock. I thought they were yellow-bellied flycatchers. It was a lousy book. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking with it. I very quickly bought the first of a series of better books, field guides. I didn't finally correctly identify that guy as a ruby-crowned kinglet until the next fall, when I took an adult ed class from Tim Barksdale. By then, the spark was set, the fire was going. I had seen a most gorgeous greeting plumaged male yellow-rumped warbler dancing around, and then a veery in Mom's backyard. Fairview Park was up the street from our house, and one day I saw a Wilson's warbler. Following Tim's advice, several in the class, including Claire, who at that time was Claire Robinson, became Claire Wheeler, and dropped a name. Betty Overall, Janice Gaston, Sandy Elbert, all joined Columbia Audubon Society on Tim's advice. And we were warmly welcomed. We took advantage of the leadership and the companion birders on the wide range of field trips, many led by Jim Wallace and Ike Adams. He ran Adams Bookstore. I saw my lifer horned lark on a CAS field trip at Bradford Farm. Boyd Terry was there and commented several times since then on that day in my excitement. Birding alone is a good way to get experience. And it's a good way to learn as you're on your own. But birding with more experienced birders is essential for learning fieldcraft and the nuances of field marks. I'm deeply indebted to Jim and Ike, Susan Hazelwood, and Brad Jacobs for those early experiences and lessons. Jerry and I took our first out-of-state birding trip in December of '93, back in Missouri on January 1st of 1994. A brown creeper was out my window 15 inches from the kitchen window, and that was the first bird of that year. And that was species number 93. I began hitching rides with Jerry. When he went around the state, he worked for Extension, he'd go to meetings, and usually he'd drive to the meeting, hop out, I'd take the car, go off and go birding, and then pick him up at a predetermined time. He never found out about the speeding ticket I got on I-435, trying to pick him up at Independence on time after seeing my live greater right-footed geese and gadwall. One day, we reversed the order, and he dropped me off and took the car, dropped me off at the Springfield Conservation Nature Center on Lake Springfield, drove away. He was well gone before I realized the center was closed for the day. That was pre-cell phone. There wasn't anything I could do in the middle of nowhere except walk the trails for 5 hours to keep warm. And it was cold and it was wet. But One of the results was lifer rusty blackbirds. And who could have a bad day looking at a prothonotary warbler? After seeing a couple dozen dick sissels on a Barksdale-led field trip, I took Jerry, who had grown up on an Iowa farm, out to see his first dick sissels. Now these birds had to have been around him every summer in the middle of Iowa. That day that when we went out together, we saw more than 30. And since neither of us had knowingly seen or heard a dick sissel ever before, we joked that this was clearly evidence of the theory of spontaneous generation. Because these birds, how could we have missed such a loud, prevalent bird? You know, they've never existed before that day. A tundra swan, fittingly at Swan Lake National Wildlife Refuge up in Sheridan County, was lifer 156, the last new bird of 1994. In January of 95, had a sandhill crane at Phillips Lake, the old Phillips Lake, when it was nothing more than a big farm pond. It was a great sight then. It's good now, but it was great then. Sandhills, with their call, to me is the epitome of wildness. It's grrr, grrr, and you can hear them when you can't even see them up there. You can hear that call. That's wilderness. And there they were. One came several years in a row to Phillips Lake. I have 3 principles for successful birding: preparation, patience, perseverance. It took me 7 trips to Rocheport to see the Inca dove hanging out below a feeder that more than 24 birders had seen several times. And every time I went, I was there for at least an hour. 7 trips to Rocheport. This is the range map of the Inca dove. To me, a range map is the best way I know to illustrate when a bird is really special to have been seen in Missouri. And you can see with that range, the Inca dove is worth going over 7 times. In May of 95, it was a typically birdie May in Missouri. And the 15 new birds I saw that month, included magnolia warbler and soras, Jerry and I attended our first Audubon Society of Missouri, now Missouri Birding Society, meeting at Camp Clover Point, Lake of the Ozarks, in 1995. I added Merlin to the life list and met a passel of friends of like-minded folk that I've come to consider as my extended family. Canvasbacks in the old, pre-developed Phillips Lake on a Columbia Christmas bird count was 1995 edition number 30, bringing the year-end total of Missouri life list to 186. Where's Gene? There you are. Look familiar? Yours was sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah. In January of 96, I went to Smithville Lake in Clay County and watched a Pomeranian chase ring-billed gulls, trying to get them to drop food. These Midwestern gulls didn't seem to understand the piratic intent of this guy. They just kind of avoided him like you would a bad or drunk driver. March migration brought ducks and shorebirds to the newly developed Eagle Bluffs Conservation Area, recovering from after the 95 flood. Among them was an American golden plover in winter plumage, like this one. Species 200 came in April on a Columbia Audubon field trip. An American black duck was spotted on the far shore of Swan Lake. Yeah, we had field trips up that far in those days. It was spotted by 82-year-old Ike Adams, sitting in his truck using an old beat-up 20-power scope. The rest of the group had missed it completely among all the mallards. I later saw a magnolia warbler specimen in the MU collection that Ike had prepared 60 years earlier. I'm privileged to have learned birding skills from Ike. A trip to southwest Missouri that year found a northern water thrush at Shepherd of the Hills Hatchery and a blue grosbeak at Prairie State Park. Back home, American avocets graced Eagle Bluffs. This one's a female with a more sharply upturned bill than males. In some species, bill differences like this allows for feeding differences that expand the food resources available to them in the same place. So it's an advantage to have different shaped bills for a breeding pair. That fall, a sanderling was at Shell Osage Conservation Area in Vernon County, down in southwest Missouri. The lifted foot in this photo shows a sanderling characteristic: no hind toe. You don't need that back toe if you spend your life zipping up and down a beach at full speed. You're running on your toes, not walking. Back at Smithville Lake, in November of '96, checking for wintering birds, one of the finds was a yellow-billed loon with its typical upturned bill. Here's the range map for yellow-billed loon. Yellow is the breeding range, the orange is the wintering range, and Missouri has no color, which means that's a big deal to find a yellow-billed loon in the middle of our state, in the middle of the continent. In those pre-internet days, unusual birds were reported to a telephone hotline run by Susan Hazelwood. Incoming calls, people would report the birds. She'd take that. She'd listen and then make a tape for the outgoing calls, telling what was being seen, where, and when. And she didn't always update it every day. It might be 2 or 3 days before something was known to be found. 2 weeks after the loon, red crossbills were reported at Lake Tacoma, so a trip to Jackson County was in order. Bender or Binder Lake in Jefferson City has had a good run of unusual birds, including a long-tailed duck in early December of '96. A black lake kittiwake at Fellows Lake, Greene County, down by Springfield, was the last new bird of 1996. This photo illustrates the conditions encountered and the challenges of making an ID in a cold, bone-chilling wind. Here's the range map for kittiwakes. Anyone that wings its way into Missouri is way off course. Long driving trips chasing rare birds are sometimes solo affairs, but they're a lot more fun when they're shared with other people. Susan Hazelwood and Jude Vickery and I went to Davies County up in Missouri, on January 18th, 1997, to see two birds, snowy owl and a lark bunny. A western meadowlark was a bonus bird for me. And while we were searching for these birds, we ran into 3 other carloads of birders from around the state looking for the same birds. Everybody shared information, everybody saw both birds. April 27th, a white-winged dove appeared at Columbia birder Knox McCrory's feeder. It was a Boone County first. And 3 years later to the day, a white-winged dove showed up at the same feeder. A May 1997 trip to Taborville Prairie was rewarded with views of 15 prairie chickens on a lek. That day, it was hard to believe the MDC prediction that the species would be extirpated from Missouri by 2012. The prediction was all too accurate. The few seen in Missouri now are probably all products of reintroduction efforts. Later that month, I was bushwhacking through a creek bottom at Rockridge and flushed a Connecticut warbler, Missouri lifer number 249. I followed it for a quarter mile as it foraged from bush to bush. Sometimes it'd look at me and just keep going, and I just followed it. The memory of that day, the feel of it, the circumstances, even the smell of the creek bottom is still with me. And I bet everybody in here has vivid memories of live birds that you've seen, everything about what was going on around it years later. It's just one of those grab you things. Lifer 250 from Missouri came 2 days later in the form of a marbled godwit at Eagle Bluffs, a ruddy turnstone, a redneck phalarope, and least sandpipers sweetened the day. This is a brant. A brant was reported the Missouri rare bird alert Susan managed. She invited me along to Stockton Lake to go look for it on October 26th. In our eagerness, we hopped out of the car and blundered onto the bird before we realized we were literally on top of it. Of course it flew. We were embarrassed, even though there was nobody else there to note what we had done. And we spent an hour relocating the bird. And we were very, very relieved that it hadn't left the lake altogether. Susan's documentation to the Rare Birds Committee was accepted. There are 2 subspecies of brant, one on the east coast of North America, one on the west. Ours was an east coast bird. Again, nothing in the middle, it's a coastal bird. The committee accepted her documentation, and there was no indication in there of why the bird moved from one place to the other. Four days later, after the brant run, a rufous hummingbird showed at Tim Barksdale's feedery in Columbia. We know now, we didn't know it then, but now we know that these rufous hummers are not strays. They're on an established migratory path from northwest U.S. to Florida. A feeder kept up in Missouri, even into November, just might attract one, as Gene well knows. Is yours still up? Mine is. Binder Lake sported an eared grebe that November. Eared grebes are more likely in the west. Horned grebes in migration are more likely in Missouri. The slope of the head is a good field mark. It's easy to remember. Eared to the rear, eared rear. and horned highest in front. So you can see how the slope is to the rear, year 3. St. Louis had a double draw for a December trip. Trumpeter swans, which were very uncommon in those years, were at Riverlands, and Creve Coeur Lake had a red-necked grebe, even rarer than the eared. It's number 261, and the last new bird of 97. Long-eared owls like to roost right up against a pine tree, where their breast markings look exactly like pine bark, making them nigh on impossible to see. It took a lot of scanning with binoculars to see this guy clear up by, James A. Reed Conservation Area up in Jackson County. Susan and Paul McKenzie formed Show Me Tours to provide guided birding adventures, with participants sharing the expenses of vehicle rental and gas. Paul and Susan were the leader guides. Most trips were out of state, like to Duluth or Arizona. But Paul led one to Southwest Missouri. A painted bunny and a Swainson's warbler were highlights. In addition to birds, those of you who know Paul kept a list of roadkill scenes. On July 15th, 1998, a bird first seen at Eagle Bluffs the day before was confirmed as Missouri's first record curlew sandpiper at about 5:30 in the afternoon. The word went out by phone, and remember, no cell phones, just landlines. Most decided to finish supper before going down to the river. And only 7 people who dropped everything and ran to the river saw the bird before it went south. Others were showing up to hear. Most of you in the room know somebody who saw it and some who missed it. It was number 280 for me. On January 8th, 1999, a varied thrush was reported feeding at the Brundage home in Columbia. Many birders tromped through snow and left boots at the front door to go see the feeder area in the back. The thrush was number 283. Lifers were becoming more spaced time-wise, but 300 in Missouri was beginning to look possible. Eurasian collared doves were rare in 1999. They'd been released from a pet store in the Bahamas and were slowly spreading from Florida. And with no discernible pattern to it, they were seen in Iowa before being reported in Missouri. The first one in Missouri was in Jackson, just north of Cape Girardeau. Susan got a report of one in Mexico, Aldrin County, Mexico, and asked if I would go check it out to verify it. Would I? Yeah, I did. It was number 290. Bonnie Heidi, Janice Gaston, Jean Leonati, and I drove to Smithville Lake in October to see the reported 3 western and 1 Clark's Creek. Westerns are rare enough in Missouri. Clarks are very rare. And I guarantee you, we made careful notes separating that bird out from the other 3 to make sure that our documentation was accepted. That was the last new bird for me in 1999. It was number 294. 300 was Looney. The year 2000 proved full of surprises, especially so for Swan Lake National Wildlife Refuge. Birds showed that most experienced seasoned birders never dreamed of seeing in Missouri. First was the tricolored heron found by Steve Kinder in mid-April. That's the range map for tricolored heron, strictly coastal. But there it was. For me, Swan Lake has a special memory. Even though it's a good hour-and-a-half drive from Columbia, it remains one of my favorite birding venues. The yellow-crowned night heron, found by Steve and reported to the hotline, became my bird 300. But didn't stop there. Heather Lambert Doherty, a Swan Lake refuge biologist, reported a sub-adult roseate spoonbill to Steve. He relayed it to the rare bird hotline. The next day, July 18th, I was among at least 15 birders up there to see it. Then I led 2 carloads back there on the 21st, resulting in 6 more birders seeing their lifer Missouri roseate spoonbill. We spent that afternoon with diesel-soaked rags cleaning road tar off the 2 cars, because in our hurry to get there, we had zoomed down the freshly oiled road into the refuge, and it was worth it. On October 6th, Jean Leonardi, Janice Gaston, and I drove to Riverlands in St. Charles County to see the reported Sabin's gull and the diminutive little gull with its distinctive wing pattern. The very next day, we went to St. Louis one day. Now, the next day, we're back up with Steve Kinder for a walk at Swan Lake. We're walking for yellow rail. 9 of us formed a line about 10 feet apart, and we walked a muddy, tall grass field. At one point, I pulled my foot out of a boot that was stuck in the mud, and then I needed help to get the boot out of the mud to get my foot back in it. We got to the end of the field, wheeled the line, and started back, and our hopes are dimming at this point. We were 3/4 of the way back when the bird flushed. And it went right. 7 of us watched it go right. Jean, at the left end of the line, started wailing when she heard us whooping and looking this way. Oh, she groaned, I was on the wrong bird. No, you weren't, said Janice, who was in the slot next to her. There were 2 birds. I saw both. One went right, one went left. January 4th, 2001, I was co-leading a show me tour group with Paul in Duluth. The SMU was reported at Riverlands, and the river in Duluth was near Blizzard. We started south late in the day, stopping at Springfield, Illinois for 4 hours sleep, and arrived at Riverlands the next morning. It looked like chocolate syrup drizzled over vanilla ice cream. That 24 hours featured a 677-mile drive from Duluth to Riverlands, followed by the 320-mile drive across the state to go turn in the vans and get our cars that we had left in Kansas City, and then the 144-mile drive back to Columbia and maybe bed. And it was fueled by adrenaline more than gasoline. It was just an incredible bird. It was accepted by the Records Committee in September of that year. You can see by the red dot how fantastic a find that was. 2001 was another very good year for Missouri birding. It began with glaucous and great blackback gulls at Lincoln Shields, which is part of Riverlands, followed by the Smew, and then a Townsend Solitaire attending the campus of William Jewell College up in Liberty, a ruff in the St. Charles River bottoms, and snow buntings near Maryville. You realize we're all over the state, but that's where they were shown. My favorite May trip, though, was known as C number 313, a lazuli bunting that came through the same northwest Missouri yard and spent a couple days each time up in Atchison County in the northwest corner, several springs in a row. Sandy Elbert and I were sitting in the wrong yard waiting for the bird when their owners came home from turkey hunting, armed, seeing us sitting in their yard, and escorted us a bit chagrined to the right yard. And the right yard was spelled right with a W too, because the family that had the bird was Mr. and Mrs. Wright. Some of you saw the most recent Lewis's woodpecker, perhaps. In October 20th, 2001, Missouri's second record Lewis's woodpecker was found at Shell Osage. I was in South Africa birding while Jerry taught community economic development. November 19th, I was freshly home from Africa and greatly accepted Bonnie Heidi's offer to take Betty Overall and me to the site to see My Lifer 320. The woodpecker that I was so afraid I was going to miss stayed until May of 2002, even though he was harassed daily by red-headed woodpeckers. January 2002 featured a prairie falcon at Taborville Prairie and a Barrow's golden eye up at Smithville. March held a ruffed grouse east of here at Daniel Boone Conservation Area, and Susan and I went for that. And then there was a white-winged crossbill to a feeder up at Les Bluffs at the headquarters. In August, a very lost brown pelican was at Shell Osage, and a red knot was at Riverlands. In October, Susan Hazelwood, Mike Warnock, and I went to Persimmon Hill Farm in Stone County down in the southwest corner to see a greater roadrunner. The article titled Interview with the Missouri Roadrunner that appeared in the September 2003 issue of the Bluebird is a result of that trip. The first roadrunner ever reported in Missouri was in 1956. It was just north of Branson. They spread slowly north and east until 3 severe winters in the 1970s, and the species began to decline in the state and across its range. But slowly, once again, now, they're expanding range in Missouri, and it may be that our warming climate may be an advantage to them. In the first week of November 2002, a calliope hummingbird began feeding at Kathleen and Harold Anderson's home. It's just one more example of the surprises a late hanging hummingbird feeder may bring. Many Columbia Audubon members, including Kathleen and Harold, went on a field trip to Kansas that weekend. I stayed in Columbia and helped traveling birders see the hummingbird. We didn't have GPS then. They didn't know where the Anderson place was or how to get there. Oh, yeah, sorry. That's the hummingbird. A year full of surprises of Missouri lifers ended with a Clark's nutcracker being found at Bush Conservation Area, St. Charles County. It was found on the morning of December 22nd. I went the next day to see lifer 331, and there was quite a crowd there on a chilly, clear, calm day. It remains the only Clark's nutcracker ever to be seen in Missouri to date. Missouri Lifer 332 was a Bachman sparrow at Caney Mountain Conservation Area, southwest Missouri, Taney County, seen with Joyce and Mike Bathke. Shortly before, the pine-loving bird was probably extirpated from Missouri as a breeder. It can still be found in a couple of places in Arkansas. This is a species that we may be able to bring back as we develop the pinery, where now we're having the brown-headed nuthatches. We might be able to get Bachman sparrows back. Fulvous whistling ducks in the boot heel in a Stoddard County rice field became species 333, and a piping plover at Eagle Bluffs, July 29th, was 334. And that's a special number for me. Phoebe Snetzinger, birder extraordinaire from the St. Louis area, was the first person to see 8,000 birds in worldwide. She had reached 333 in Missouri. Phoebe has been my role model in attitude toward birding and in sharing with other birders. I felt I had come of age when I met and passed her number of Missouri species. Common redpoll was 335. Species 336 was a rock wren found in March of 2005 at the Apache Motel, Rich Hill, Bates County, over near the Kansas line, hanging around some rocks in the back of the property. It was a good example of build it and they will come, even if you don't intentionally build it. On April 19th, 2005, I went with Susan to see a burrowing owl at Les Bluffs, reported the previous afternoon. The owl was species 341. It would be 4 years before I added the next 10 Missouri species. Missouri's only record of fork-tailed flycatcher, seen April 26th to 28th in 2009 in Buchanan County, north of St. Joe, was number 351. And it's likely another will appear. They're seen every year in states east and north of us. One will be back one of these days. You'll get your chance. And took another 4 years for the next 10 species. 361 was this first-year mountain bluebird, photographed by Al Smith in Johnson County near Warrensburg in November of 2012, as June Newman and I looked on. This winter plumaged red phalarope, my Missouri species 368, is among my favorite sightings because it was found and photographed and shown to me by Brad Jacobs up at Swan Lake, that he was up teaching a sparrow workshop when the bird was found. This is my photo. I took this photo. The heat shimmer in the great distance show the difficulties of birding in late July in the Missouri boot heel. And that pink blob is not cotton candy. It is a flamingo, an American flamingo. And it wasn't accepted to the main list of the Missouri by the Missouri Records Committee. Its provisional status is due to questions of its origins. It's presumed to be the same bird that was seen at St. Mark's Refuge in the panhandle of Florida before the hurricane, but we couldn't prove it. So, origin unknown, and it is not on the official list. And the 575-mile round trip to 10 Mile Pond Conservation Area added no official Missouri bird. Not that it bothers me. In May of 2020, an Anhinga was found at Creve Coeur Lake, St. Louis County. And that was a lot closer than previous ones that had been reported in far southeast Missouri. It became Missouri Lifer 369. Boobies are oceanic birds, but here it was, and this is the one in this photo. It was found on a current river in Shannon County. Locals generously gave boat rides to birders converging on it in a remote section of a fast-moving river. Kay Palmer showed up with her kayak on top, hoping to get in, go down, and then make her way back up. And they all said, mm-mm. She hopped in the boat with me and Tim Caven that was being piloted by a local birder, and he took us down to see this bird together. That's the range map for brown boobies. Another one that has no business being up here in the middle of Missouri. And what's really weird is, one was seen on the Lake of the Ozarks hanging out on a diving board in 2022, a clearly different bird from this one. And another one was seen in Perry County, just north of Cape Girardeau, that year also, last year. The last find for me of 2020 was a vermilion flycatcher hawking insects in December at Little River Conservation Area. It was a 640-mile round trip, solo, to Duncan County, and it was species 371. And it reminded me of a special site, the Little River. I just wish it were closer to home. 372 was a lot closer. The ferruginous hawk was found at the University of Missouri Beef Research and Teaching Farm in February of 2021. It drew a multitude of birds and brought a simmering problem to a head when a photographer, wanting 50 more shots of the very cooperative bird, refused to move when a bee farm employee's truck tried to get past her on the road. As a result, all birders were banned from the beef farm and other ag research properties in mid-Missouri, including Bradford Farm with the second highest species list in the county, second only to Eagle Bluffs. Until some way to monitor birders, who's present and who's doing what, could be found. I worked with Dusty Walter, director of the Central Missouri Research and Extension Center, to come up with a hang tag program administered by Missouri Birding Society so that all birders on site can be identified by number. And anyone with a hang tag is now welcome on those sites. November of 21, another mega rarity was found in the boot heel at the Steele Municipal Airport, Pemiscot County, a 630-mile round trip. Al Smith was there taking this photo of the bird strolling along the runway as I added long-billed curlew for species 373. Missouri's Mennonite community includes some of the state's top birders who have spotted and reported numerous rarities, including my 367, a green-tailed towhee, and 374, this sage thrasher, viewed on private land with permission, January 31st, 2022. As we all know, the biggest birding story of 2022 was the Bogley occurrence of 12 or more limpkins found around the state, most on private properties, hard to get to. Limpkins in the U.S. had been restricted to Florida until just a couple years ago, when they were then found in coastal Louisiana and Texas. And then, boom, exploded all over the Midwest. The best explanation we have is that the spread of exotic snails, that is their favorite food, fueled a population explosion of the limpkins, who then went out to find new territories, and they're spreading out all over the place. Excuse me. I rode with Paul McKenzie to Lake Springfield, and it was to find one that was spotted there, and it was all-day search for a bird that was gone. A few days later, one was reported at Lake Tacoma, and that became Dave Easterly's number 400. And the next day, Doug White offered a boat ride to 4 birders, and boy, I was on there fast as I could. And I don't know if you know Larry Olpen from Warrensburg. He was on the boat with me, and that became my lifer 375. In early April 2013, a gargany was in Sheraton County up by Swan Lake. But before I could get there, an out-of-state photographer, eager for the eyeball reflective shot, got too close and spooked the duck into the great unknown. This last April, a gargany was found at Los Bluffs. I was on a ship birding coastal South and Central America with Claire Wheeler and others on a wings birding tour when I heard of it, and I was sure I'd missed the 3rd state record of gargany. Betsy Garrett wanted to see it, but she was only free the morning I arrived home at midnight from a flight from Los Angeles. And I knew I was not lucid enough to drive that far. She volunteered to drive, and we went up to Los Bluffs. The Mennonite birders spotted the bird for us, and we got dynamite looks. And that was number 376. A juvenile, immature purple gallinule at a Webb City wastewater treatment pond just north of Joplin prompted a drive to see it on August 16th of this year. It's Missouri Lightbird 377. Not a stunner, but when you look at those toes, it's incredible. I want to emphasize that while seeing 377 bird species in Missouri is a personal achievement, it's only possible because of the birding community of Columbia and across Missouri. People who share information, the excitement of the chase, and the joys of the finds. And chases to see as many species as possible takes a lot of travel. This map from IE-Bird Profile shows the relative totals for Missouri counties. Boone with 306 is the red one in the middle, the dark red one. Those light yellow ones show where I need to do a little more exploring. Who knows, maybe 378 is in one of them. Want to come along? Thanks, guys.
And I have no remarks to tell you. That was just, I'm speechless. So.
I just don't know how to get it over here.
I don't either.